Good evening.
I was so moved by Karen and Adriana's comments earlier. I think one about the ability and willingness to fail and to not know what the heck you're getting yourself into and to embrace that. And I really needed that reminder as EOS grows and as we go forth and do all sorts of things that it's okay to not have everything buttoned up for an event, for a visit, for a funder, and then you learn as you go. And always that you have to know nothing before you can start to learn. So I enjoy knowing nothing with you guys here over the next couple of days and adding to our learning. And then the other thing I was just moved by is the sense of leaving everything behind in order to invest in your own education and your sense of possibility in the future, and the significance of those stakes for everyone here in this room and the responsibilities that we have for folks who leave everything behind, whether it's like Adriana or like my own wife, who left behind everyone she knew and her family and her home and her language and moved actually here to the city of Chicago at the age of 6. And the tremendous responsibility that creates for us as leaders that have the ability to impact what that investment actually means for students. And students who begin school in the country as well and spend half of the days of their childhood roughly in our care and under our supervision and in the buildings that we run every day, because they want something incredible out of their lives and the opportunity we have to provide that. I was a little bit nervous about the need to start this talk this way, but I think it's important to really highlight this, not least of which is because it's on our minds, but most of which is because it's on our students' minds. So a year ago when we did host our first national convening, it was in Washington, D.C., and we were recognized by Broderick Johnson, not EOS, but EOS and our partners, who was the cabinet secretary of the White House at the time and chair of My Brother's Keeper task force. And it was an amazing event, and it was a sense of possibility and hope for all that we were building and could do in this country to make real the promise of opportunity for underserved students. And here's the part that I didn't want to go in, but again, it's a part of what's happened in the last year is we and our students have seen the KKK march since that time, and their shameful message of hate elevated in the national conversation. We have seen a continuation of police violence, particularly against men and women of color in this country. We have seen not only the continuation of mass incarceration in the United States that dramatically, disproportionately affects men of color in the U.S., sending a very strong message about who belongs where. We have seen an increase in those sorts of things. We talk about the American dream as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is one of the leading private prison industries whose stock has doubled since this time last year. Our students have heard from the U.S. Attorney General that their status granted as legal in this country may be reversed at a moment's notice during the course of this very school year. They may receive knocks on their doors. We have heard messages about who belongs in this country based on religion and who does not. And the latest federal budget threatens to balloon the debts of our graduates who are already overburdened by cost, by eliminating federal support for student loan interest rates, and eliminating programs that support the next generation of teachers by forgiving loans for those who go into public sector careers. And I think it's certainly true for me and for the team at EOS, and I imagine for all of you in your schools, looking at the focus of a national conversation about the prototypes for building a wall behind a wall, we can feel pretty hopeless and it feels out of our hands, and you wake up and you see the next piece of news, and our students hear this news, and you say, how are they going to respond? How can we support them? How can we show up for them? What can we possibly do with this context? And I think it's all the more important to remember that what happens within inside these walls is what's going to determine the future of this country. And these are the walls that we have autonomy and authority to control and to enable the next generation of opportunity within our schools. These walls and what happens here is far more important. And what happens within those at the classroom level, I wrote an essay a while back about education as democracy, that those terms are one and the same in a sense, and what happens in the classroom is the core and the heart and the soul of democracy, where people learn how to learn, where they uncover their opportunity and their possibilities. And so while it feels so often that we are not in the driver's seat in the direction of this country, we are in fact in the driver's seat, and the opportunities that we create are more important by far than ever. And so I want to sort of take it out of the national, piece of this into, what can we do within this context? And I want to take the national dialogue and piece around prejudice and discrimination in that conversation and do a little what I'm going to call an anatomy of prejudice and discrimination. And so I think taking it out of the ether and into our hands and into what's in front of us and into the action we can take is what this next day is about. Hearing from colleagues, thinking about these issues, and really doing it through a lens about belonging. And so I think, before we go into it here, I think the reason for belonging for us comes from thinking about certainly some of the national pieces, but actually how this plays out. And at the core of what we do in partnership with you all, it's about who belongs where, and why, and what are we going to do about it. And over the course of the last year, I've been privileged to have a few conversations with Claude Steele, author of Whistling Vivaldi, former dean of the Stanford Graduate School of Education. And I said, where is this field of belonging going? Because with our partners, it turns out we have about 200 times as much data on sense of belonging as the lead researchers in the field. And what he said is that you and your district partners are the leaders in the field now. And so where the field is going is up to you. And I'd be interested in consulting on the project and the research that you guys have going forward. But that expertise is really with you guys. The level of conversation that we can have, I think, here over the next day, the conversation we can have in collaboration with one another in some of the forums we're going to be creating over the next year, enables us to do some incredible things and set a sense of possible here. And so for working definitions for this talk, I want to talk about prejudice as a negative sense of who belongs where. So this idea, this piece in the ether around, hey, this type of person here, this type of person there, this is why. It may not be spoken, but it's thought. And discrimination really as trying to enact that or push that in on people, put people in their place as the notion of discrimination. And so, we'll cut pretty quickly to the school level examples here of this, but just one from my experiences as a teacher and administrator in South Carolina. This is the entranceway to Battery Creek High School. And I remember vividly first coming into this school, and the first thing that you see is a big glass enclosure with chairs that are actually elevated up above the hallway. And at any given time you can see about 6 to 10 uniformed security guards as well as police officers armed in the entranceway to that building. And I tried for years, but failed to convince the principal that was the perfect place to put our IB program, and to put the ability to say, when you come into this school, we got amazing things in store for you. We got amazing learning. Come hear from other students. Come see their work. Come see what's possible. this is where we think you belong, this is what we think is in your future, not a schools to prison pipeline. And so I think, we're all here because we have a particular and a strong answer to this question about where we think students belong. We're here because we've made a commitment that students of every race and income background belong equally at the highest levels of our school system, belong in rigorous academic learning opportunities and experiences. And those commitments, to give you a little sense of where we've been in the last year, have had significant effect, including here in Illinois, where we've seen more than a doubling of participation by low-income African American students in a single year in our partnerships. We have commitments now from the state of Illinois to close the access gap statewide, as well as from the state of Maryland to close the low-income and students of color gap statewide. And there's a little bit of a competition going here. The numbers are pretty similar. The timing, Illinois has a 1 year. Illinois has a 1 year head start. But both of these states, both the governor's office and the state chief education officer, have committed to do everything that they can to become the first state in the U.S. ever to reflect student diversity and talent at the highest levels of K-12. It's never been done in the history of this country, and what a powerful opportunity to build on the progress in Illinois here this year to enable that to happen and to say, this is where we think low-income students and students of color belong in our school systems. And the partnerships for EOS in total span across 27 states now. We started up a bit over 6 years ago. Niambi, our new chief operating officer, and I scrambling around with a few districts trying to get things done, trying to make things happen, and here we are now across 27 states, 152 districts, 446 schools, having found and changed the opportunities for over 46,000 missing students, 2/3 of these low-income students and students of color. And I don't, I appreciate the introduction comment, but I don't credit this to myself at all. I think this is because this is the right work for us to do, and this is the right set of opportunities for us to create. And we'll hear it every day and in every survey and in every interaction we have over the coming years in working together from students. That this is the right thing. We have tens of millions of data points of student voice now talking to us about how to do this work, why to do this work, how to take action. As folks mentioned earlier, this is now in our hands. They know what we should be doing. We know what we should be doing. And how do we navigate that and do that together is what I know you all are committed to figuring out. And so, it's not about answering the question of where they belong for one another and in the room having the same view on that. It's starting down this path of, is that the experience that students are having of what we're trying to do? And so a little bit of the frame, there's 2 questions here, you'll see a third one in a little bit, is about the evolution of our learning, our realizing what we don't know yet at EOS. And we will be developing our program model to meet some of these needs, including launching for the first time next fall an effort to really delve into this question of, is this the student experience? Are they experiencing belonging? Are they having positive experiences in advanced courses? Is what we intend to do as leaders of these systems translating well, and are they having positive experiences and success in those courses? But for now, we'll just talk a little bit about the sort of baseline in terms of how students experience some of this, and then what some folks have been doing in the portfolio to change that. So this is a quote from a student who was asked about, what are you hearing about AP? How does it go over? And the response from the student was, well, when I ask people who are in the classes, they say, oh, you mean my AP class? You hear a lot of negative comments from other students who are there to begin with. This notion that students are making it seem like there's only a certain type of student who needs to take these classes. Again, this sort of in the air about who belongs where and what our student is experiencing about that. Another student quote, the image of the AP student, you know, the stereotype. As one of very few Hispanic people in my AP classes, maybe, you know, I don't belong here. It's like going into a fight thinking you're already going to lose. You get there, I don't belong here. These people are smarter than me. Maybe, you know, I wasn't meant to be in this class. Very articulate students who are stumbling on this notion, and they're caught in this, wait, do I belong there? I get all these messages around me saying one thing, and I hope for another thing, but I don't know. The notion that teachers, some of the teachers, were annoyed, and again, this sort of, this is mine, this is yours, this is where I belong, this is where you belong, like this is their territory, and you are stepping in. And then I was debating whether to share this. It's a personal experience instead of a professional one, but I came to the city early in order to spend some time with my mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law who live here, and went out with my wife, and she and I met the husband of one of her longtime friends. And it turned out that this husband is a counselor in one of the schools in the region that we work at. And he didn't know anything about my professional background. And he was talking to me about the state of his school and the work that was going on and what it meant to him. He was a white guy, I'm a white guy. He sort of had this sort of, you know, knowing sense of belonging about what we're talking about here with each other. And his notion was, if a kid doesn't know how to get in, they probably don't belong and shouldn't be there in the first place. And then it escalated a bit. He and his wife went back and forth about how, you know, how PC things are these days in his school. How, gosh, there was this young black woman who was complaining that the teacher was picking on her, and, you know, come on, why should we have to deal with this kind of stuff all the time? I'm dealing with this kind of stuff. And we can't talk about it, but really every day we're fighting it. He said, we're fighting this, we're fighting this. And he about fell out of his chair when he found out what I did for a job. But I don't usually get that insight. You don't usually get that level of insight into how things are playing out. And I think, you know, we know that. We know that there are people in our school, there are adults in our school with those sorts of approaches, but it was very visceral to me, again, thinking back to what people give of their lives as students and what they give up and what they invest in their education and what those opportunities are, to have somebody in there saying, we're fighting to keep things as they are, to keep people in their place because they don't know about this secret great thing in our school. And so I think, you know, there is this sense, because things are nebulous, this sense of where people are and what they belong, you know, swirling around, oh, 99% of diverse schools don't reflect their diversity in AP and IB. It's just sort of the way it is. We don't recognize it, we don't talk about it. And so I think, you know, in the sort of anatomy and deconstructing of prejudice and discrimination, and actually thinking about anti-prejudice and anti-discrimination work that we do together, whether or not you call it that in your communities. Just chatting with people earlier about, hey, we get a lot of pushback from parents who are vested interests here, and so we may talk about it differently, or we may push through quietly and tell them once things are successful. But the advice from a student, we said, well, what should staff be doing about this issue? And they said, well, it's pretty simple. Tell students that those classes are for them. Tell them that they belong. Another student directly addressing it at the moment when students feel vulnerable. If a teacher just discussed it for even a minute or two, it would make a really big difference. And some of you all in the room, I really appreciate the folks who invited us in to do some site visits this year and do some reflection on the progress. that's been happening, and to distill some of these practices, I'm going to share about how adults are actually doing this really well. When we do our AP outreach, they talked about the first thing they say is, you're here because we care about you. Teachers that made sure that everyone felt safe in the class, and everyone felt that they were welcome. I love this next one, this sort of, you know, in the ether about who belongs where into this, you know. Teacher says, AP Chemistry wants you. And going beyond that to a systematic level, people mentioned the student insight cards and this sort of thing. This quote of, it was almost like an FBI thing, except not FBI as law enforcement. FBI is, what do we know about this kid? Where can they be successful? And an administrator who absolutely delighted in, and this is the moments of our work that have always most delighted me, came to the classroom and knocked on the door. And you think about some of the knocks on the doors that people are thinking about, our students are thinking about getting. And this knock on the door, and the administrator who they don't know, and they're coming out and they're saying, the principal's here to talk to me? Oh, what's going on? And what's happening is the principal is hand delivering an invitation into AP and congratulating the student. And I think, you know, the sort of last piece of this good practice here is sticking with it. It was mentioned earlier, I think, by Karen, the continuation of going back to students. If you're swimming in water that says one thing to you every day, you need to stick with it when you're advocating in a way instead of for prejudice and discrimination for opportunity. And so we have seen a pattern that's kind of that's seriously problematic, I think, for us across our portfolio. It can be 20 to 25% of the missing students that we found together with you from the spring course request period to the fall period drop out of the AP or IB classes. Was there a summer assignment? Was there a change of heart? What happened to these students? And some of the best practices, I think this one was out of Leiden, where they said, you have to go through the assistant principal before you can drop a course. No, we're serious. You belong here. And instead of a 25% rate at which students, oh, I really, you know, they talked to me about it, but then I really realized where I belong. They had hundreds of students accessing advanced courses and ended up with 95% of those sticking with it because of the engagement of those leaders. And they have these great lawn signs, which are a part of I think the parent night that you guys do around, 900 students across the two campuses with parents amazed at how engaged the students are and how much the staff care. And across different schools, we've seen cases where you can see a 60% increase in underrepresented non-AP students receiving encouragement for AP. While it's the trend across our portfolio that a majority of students of color worry about whether they'll belong when they start their first AP, we've seen schools that have cut that in half over the course of the year during the AP class and the AP experience. And so, you know, I think the third question, and this will become, in many senses, the third prong of our program model. We've answered the question of where we think students belong. We will build the model about underrepresented student experience and success to launch next fall. And then the third question that we'll launch in 2019 is, will it grow? We've had so many initiatives, all of us, where it's a fly-by-night initiative. It's here today, gone tomorrow. The leadership changes, and the water comes back in over the situation. And I think, I don't know if people have heard this metaphor in the education reform research. It's a beautiful purple onion. But what it says is that when we do things in education, we usually get at the outer layers. You know, maybe there's some national policy around the peel and skin area. Maybe you got some state policy layers in there. Maybe you got district policy, a school level policy. Maybe you got a departmental policy. And that so seldom do we ever reach that green growth in the middle where all the learning takes place. And if we do, it's usually only for a passing moment. And what we're doing, I think, needs to reach the core. And we've seen retrenchments, even Battery Creek High School, where I started off. We went back the next year and some students interviewed teachers for a college project. They were down in college and going back and saying, you know, what do you think would happen if we tried to close a gap in access by race and income to our IB and AP program? And people said, well, I think it would probably be a disaster. I don't think students could do it. We'd probably lower the test scores. Da, da, da. And the students said, well, we did close the gap last year. And here's what actually happened. And the teachers had no clue about it because we hadn't thought about sustainability. I hadn't thought about sustainability. I was too gung-ho to go off and figure out where else could we do this work, to really think about what would stick there. And so I think that's going to be the third prong of our model, is really working with you all to make sure this stuff sticks. And it is about telling the stories that we've seen this past year. 90% of students who were in AP to begin with have A's, B's, or C's. 90% of the students we added have A's, B's, or C's. Or a school where they double the participation for underrepresented students in a single year, and they see the pass rates and the GPAs up. Telling those stories, figuring out how to shift that culture and change the thought cloud that's in the air in a more permanent way. So some examples of how that's playing out, back to the sort of AP poster. This notion was, gosh, we went through these posters and the culture changed, and people got pissed off when we took it down. They said, where's our posters? This is a part of who we are. We're out there advocating for and recruiting students. They belong in our AP classes. And I love this one, the notion that we as educators started this movement, but the kids are continuing it. Students like Adriana, this notion of student panels, hearing from students coming back to tell other students about what it's like, leveraging our student experience survey and other things to really make that advocacy a part of the day-to-day. And this notion of this postcard to peers piece. So we have worked with Stanford on a sense of belonging intervention that pretty consistently boosts passing of APs by 6 percentage points for a half-an-hour intervention. And how it works is you tell students that a majority of their peers worry about belonging when they start, so it's destigmatized. Say, oh, okay, it's just normal to worry about whether I belong when I start. That's not something wrong with me. You let them hear from other peers about that in qualitative comments. Here's what I went through, here's what it's like, here's where it led me. And then you have them at the end of the exercise write a postcard to a peer. What did you learn about sense of belonging? How would you convey this message to other people? And so this quote from an administrator who's now got hundreds of these postcards to peers, just can't wait to give them out next year and have that be what's really in the air about who belongs where. And then I think this culture tip is something that we don't have figured out totally. That's an area where we don't yet know, but we've seen some exciting things from you all so far. This notion of student voice being integrated in other ways in the school. This notion of shifting the dialogue, as we talked about last year, from suspensions and discipline to focusing on academics. This is what we're seeing in the class. How can we help? How can we get better? If we have pep rallies for sports, why can't we have an academic rally? And that message really getting through around who belongs where and sticking in a more permanent way in the community. This they were talking about a sort of both a gang and a non-academic reputation that a school had, and that parents seeing that fundamentally shift. And one leader really thinks, we don't know where the tipping point is yet. But one leader thinks, hey, you get 60% of your kids in college level coursework, it's going to change the culture of a school, and all those negative things that you've been focused on will go down. We're going to do some research in the year ahead to think more about what are those tipping points. And we know our equity measure is not perfect, but what are the things that actually matter to student experience and tip students' sense of belonging, tip adults' sense of who belongs where, and enable culture shift that can sustain. Teachers popping in, it feels different around here, and this notion that on the next round of surveys at this school, 86% of staff see addressing AP and IB inequities as a top priority or a core responsibility of their work, advocating on behalf of historically underrepresented and underserved students. So to take us back to sort of where we started, and what we'll be talking about in the next day here, it is really, this is where the future of our democracy gets built. This is where you all are, in some ways, the kings and queens of what happens, and you can go back and you can make changes and decisions. You can assert things about who belongs where. You can empower your team to do the same. You can create that advocacy and work with us to ensure that it makes it all the way to the center of the onion, where the growth happens in the classroom, and that not only is that growth happening in the classroom, but that beautiful center part of the onion is where the seeds come from. And you can think about, I think we'll talk a little bit more about this in the day to come, but I would encourage you to think about one of the core aspects of sustainability as spreading this work. If you as a leader leave, if you and a couple other people on your equity team leave, what's going to happen to this work? How can we work with you to ensure it sustains? And I would argue that the best thing that we can do is think about regional momentum, like we're starting to do here in Illinois, for example, so that it doesn't become about who's this crazy leader who came along and said that low-income students and students of color belong equally in our most rigorous and challenging courses. Well, that was crazy, and now thank goodness they're gone, and we can go back to the way that we're doing things here, and we've been fighting to put back into place. But instead, it becomes, wait, who in the region hasn't yet dramatically altered their access patterns for low-income students and students of color? Why aren't they doing that? Can I talk to them? Can I, instead of having served 300 missing students this year, can I think about a responsibility for my region to serve 3,000 so that this becomes a part of the water that we drink, a part of the air that we breathe, and really enable that equitable access to our most academically intense classrooms. The students we're working for are brilliant and beautiful, and together we will advocate for them until their potential, and thereby ours, becomes unbounded. I really appreciate everyone being here tonight, and look forward to the day ahead. Thank you so much. I think we're mostly out of time, but we wanted to do maybe 5 or 10 minutes if folks had questions or thoughts that they wanted to ask about the day ahead, about the work, about where we've come in the last year, anything like that. Just grab my water here.
So you talked a little bit about 60% is the culture change number, or you gave that example up there. In your experience, when looking at different buildings, could you talk a little bit more about how you came up with that number, or what a reasonable number is for AP? Because in the school I work at, we have a great group of kids in AP, but we also have some other students that are more of a hands-on variety. They might go into a program to be a machinist or something else. And those students, not that they're not a student that could take an AP class, but they just might not prefer to.
Yeah.
So what's the number?
Yeah, that's a great question. We don't know what the number is yet. That was an administrator's comment about where they thought the tipping point is. I think I've seen a lot of schools where they get to around 70% too as a really significant marker, and people start the conversation. Once you're in a majority of the school population, I think people start to talk about how could we have this opportunity for all students or most students. It could fit in with a career education program for sure. heard conversation earlier tonight about we want to do this with our English, so everybody ends with a high level of English, because whatever career you're in, reading is going to be really beneficial. But I think you see really significant things when you get to that majority, and we'll have more data and thoughts on this as we build that next stage of the program model to really answer that better.
Well, if I can just add, because we get those questions, college and career ready, and sometimes APs in line with college, but what about trades? There's trades that have fewer pool of students. How come in high school we're not having more kids participating in the trades or the vocational track? And we talk a lot about there's 4 years, and that's it. You cannot go back and experience rigor. You can go into trades when you're 18, 19, 20, there's all kinds of opportunities, but you cannot go back and replace the rigor that you might have missed during that 4-year window. So a welder or a machinist, being able to like read nonfiction in depth and understand it, or write well, you can get that, and it's hard to come back and shore that up later. Mm-hmm. Our conversation, when you get past high school, you can restart college when you're 20, 21, 24, 25. You cannot come back and replace that rigor that you could have had in high school that is that foundation for that next step. So that's why sometimes we get that argument like, why this kid, I think, wants to work with his hands or be in trade. You say, no, wait a minute, let's not decide that for him. Let's not let him miss the rigors that can really shore up whatever he wants to do.
Yeah, and a lot of the national data supports that. Dropouts really saying they wish they were pushed harder academically pretty consistently. Students in our research saying, gosh, my only regret is I didn't take more of these classes sooner, and the forecasts nationally for the labor market are for major deficits in college-educated jobs in terms of labor force readiness.
I think we just have to change, and I agree with David, we have to change the conversation from an either-or to an and-but.
Yeah.
Students can be tracking towards some type of a vocational program and still meeting the rigor of APA coursework. In our district, we're looking at the CP program for IT, and we believe that we incorporate that in the next year and a half, and 100% of our students at that high school will be in some kind of a high rigor course because it's designed that way. But like Dave, that reading component is critical for every student. So why not have them spend half their day taking AP courses and the other half of their day tracking towards some kind of vocational certification? We just have to change the conversation.
Any other questions before we close? Anyone wants to ask where the bar is? It's down the elevator to the lobby. Great. Thank you everyone so much for being here with us.